From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to really celebrate President's Day by busting out the velocipede and top hat. And now, the podcast host who can't wait to show you his new giant hat, Pete Dominic!
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Pico. I did have to look up velocipede, an early form of bicycle propelled by working pedals on cranks fitted to the front axle. Thank you very much, Pico, as always, and happy President's Day, everybody. Whatever the hell that means. Hopefully you have the day off. I did not take the day off. I'm here with you, working, and very grateful for it because I can't do it without you listening and without your support. So there's a show, and I've got two great guests. It is Monday. I did have a conversation with Maura Quint that I think you're going to like very much, as always, and Economist Dean Baker joins me on today's show for the second time in a few weeks because lots to talk with him about. So Dean Baker and Maura Quint are both my guests on today's President's Day special. Really, nothing special at all about it. The girls have the day off, but Ava's in Spain anyway. They have the entire week off this week. Do your school-age kids have this week off? Did they have last week off? I think it's a pretty widely observed week off here in February. The third Monday of February is when President's Day falls, and it's also the last week of February, full week of February as we speak, and it's our intern Odessa San's birthday. Happy birthday, Odessa. You're doing a great job on the show, and people have noticed your hard work. So let me just mention a couple of news stories here at the top because people mostly like when I do that on the regular daily show, and then we will get to my guests. By this point, I'm sure you heard the news about former President Jimmy Carter, who it feels like he's pretty beloved. Or is it beloved by most Americans who are at least a little bit familiar with him? But the president's former charity announced on Saturday in a statement that President Carter had, quote, decided to spend his remaining time at home with his family instead of receiving additional medical treatment following a series of hospital stays. He has the full support of his family and his medical team, the statement added. The 98-year-old Jimmy Carter is the longest living president in American history. He was elected the 39th president in 1976, narrowly defeating, of course, incumbent Gerald Ford to win the White House. Following his one term, he became known for his humanitarian efforts with his work with Habitat for Humanity. I saw a video of him going around over the weekend from, I don't know how long ago, maybe not too long ago, walking down the aisle of a commercial plane that he was a passenger on. Apparently, of course, he flies commercial, and he was basically shaking the hands of almost every single person in the airplane, except for one Trumper who started screaming about having to wear a mask. I'm kidding. That didn't happen in this video. Of course, Jimmy Carter was a pivotal person in American history, and an important person because he's the president. Every president's an important person in American history. He only did one term. How important was he? Well, I think I may ask Jim Fallows or Jonathan Alter. Fallows, of course, worked with Jimmy Carter, and Jonathan Alter wrote a biography about him. I reached out to both of them. We'll see if they want to talk this week or if after Jimmy Carter transitions, passes on. I don't know what's appropriate, but I'd be happy to talk with both of them, and I reached out to both of them. I think that Jimmy Carter's speech, referred to as his malaise speech, was actually really good. Hard to believe that a U.S. president would even ever make a speech like this, but he at one point warned that consumerism was destroying us, which I've believed my entire mature adult life. He was right then, and I think it's, we could kind of say we're in its end game in some ways, late stage capitalism and climate crisis and so many more things. But I found my favorite part of that speech on somebody put it on Twitter. It's got music and a little video of people clamoring and going crazy at retail outlets, fighting over TV screens and stuff like that. But here it is.
Good evening. It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities. Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning.
Yes, indeed. Jimmy Carter's Crisis of Confidence speech, it was called. It was ridiculed as the malaise speech. I think it should be seen as a turning point in American history. That's what somebody wrote on Twitter. I agree. One of the great speeches ever given by a president. Instead, Americans rolled their eyes at the idea of consumerism being a bad thing. Maybe that's something that we could talk about together as a group at our hangout that I'm already looking forward to. And I'm going to invite a special guest to this week's hangout Thursday nights at 8 p.m. if you're a stand-up subscriber. Somebody that I think that I know that you'll really like, and maybe a few people. I think it would be really exciting to have some of our favorite guests just pop in as surprises. And so that's what I'm going to plan for this Thursday night. So don't miss it. Some people that you really like are going to stop by live and in person this Thursday. We had 60 people hanging out at one point last week, so I bet you we'll get a lot more if we have some of our favorite stand-up stars. Make your suggestions now of who you'd like to see. standupwithpete@gmail.com. By the way, last Thursday night is pretty funny because comedian J.L. Covan, who's also a stand-up subscriber, a very generous one, stopped in. And there he was. We all got excited because we all saw him, and I was excited to go to him. But then we looked up at Karen Madison's box on the Zoom, and that sounded bad. We looked up at her video on the Zoom, and guess who was sitting there? Jason Johnson. They're good friends, and he lives nearby, and all of a sudden, there he was. And so J.L. Covan got bumped, which is the story of his life. It was really funny, and he rolled with it, and they had a great conversation that I might just play on tomorrow's show with some other people. Bill Boyle was weighing in. I thought it was really interesting and quite a surprise. So you never know what's going to happen at the hangout. Be there this week for special guests. Tell me who you want to come. Who should I invite? standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, what else did I want to mention? I think it's a major story what we've learned with these revealed documents about Fox News executives and staff revealed as part of the Dominion lawsuit against the network, where they privately mocked and disagreed with, had doubts about, or otherwise exhibited their skepticism or outright rejection of false claims of fraud or other conspiracy theories put out by Donald Trump, while nevertheless treating them completely credible, or even in the case of opinion hosts like Tucker Carlson, purporting to buy into them. Well, that's a huge story. It matters for a lot of reasons. We'll see if there are any changes at Fox News, much less if they have to pay $1 billion in a lawsuit. I just read they filed a counterclaim against Dominion, which I hope will go nowhere. But because I think it's a big story, I'm going to be talking about it, and certainly I want to play clips from it. This is a Republican who's now a CNN commentator because he did the right thing when he was the lieutenant governor of Georgia in the 2020 election, vis-a-vis the election. He was on CNN arguing that Fox News hurt the Republican Party by enabling ex-president Donald Trump and repeating his attacks on the process despite their own privately shared misgivings. Listen to Jeff Duncan says about what this means.
Well, look, it's not surprising to see eventually all these facts and figures are coming out. It's taken 2 years to get here. The AJC this morning was full of text messages and indictment speculations. What happened on Fox News was hard for the Republican Party, right? It might take a decade to unwind some of those fanning of the flames of all these conspiracy theories, and it was painful to watch and listen to. But I think all of media needs to find a better balance of managing a business model, which, look, this is a for-profit operation in every media outlet, but also how we tell the news and how do we use that as a weapon or as a resource?
Well, nothing's going to change, I think it's fair to say, at places like CNN, where Jeff Duncan is now making probably a boatload of money as a CNN commentator. And there are nonprofit media outlets. And then there are subscriber-based ones like this, which are clearly questionable as to the legitimacy or credibility of the person talking or writing, if it's on Substack or elsewhere. But there is clear accountability to the subscribers, and arguably nothing could be more ethical than something like what we're doing here at Stand Up, where I don't even have ads. I was inspired to do this model because my own brother did it a long time ago on something called the New Standard News, where he employed journalists and he only took subscriptions from, in his case, anonymous donors, which made it even that much more ethical and moral. But yeah, I'm beholden to you. So far, so good, as we are just over 3 years in on this media outlet. And that, of course, I think is a tribute to the credibility of the people who join me on a regular basis on the show as guests. So please, one of the best things you can do outside of a paid subscription is add the podcast to your library so it comes up in your feed. And even more meaningful, if you could give it a 5-star review and share an episode with a friend. And how about this? The Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, over the weekend was at the Munich Security Conference and made a major announcement. Here's Patrick Revel of ABC News.
This morning, Vice President Kamala Harris taking to the world stage at the Munich Security Conference, for the first time declaring the US has determined Russia has committed crimes against humanity in Ukraine.
We have examined the evidence. We know the legal standards. And there is no doubt these are crimes against humanity.
While the US had already formally determined Russia had committed war crimes in Ukraine, crimes against humanity is a different category under international law, the UN saying they stretch beyond war crimes. The announcement coming as Russia is kicking off a major new offensive in eastern Ukraine.
Well, there you go. Very important reporting and development. So I wanted to throw that on there for you. Here now is something less important, but still interesting to me. This is a short clip of now Republican 2024 presidential candidate, former governor of South Carolina, Donald Trump's former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. It's Nikki Haley, who has very little to offer when asked to explain what distinguished her from Donald Trump as they run against each other for the same office. Here she is on Fox News with Shannon Bream.
Clearly, you think you're a better option than he is, or you wouldn't have gotten into the race. So where do you two differ?
I don't focus on President Trump, and it's amazing that the media wants to talk about that so much.
But you will have to get through the GOP primary. You will have to focus on him and Governor DeSantis or anybody else who gets in. To get to President Trump, you will have to get through that field.
My announcement was to a few thousand people in South Carolina. I just had packed rooms in New Hampshire. Not one person asked me about President Trump. Everybody wanted to talk about Biden. Everybody wanted to talk about the problems facing American families. I am focused on Joe Biden. He's the one that's the president. You know, I will tell you, I think Americans need to have options. I think they need a new generation. I think we need new energy going in. I think we need to leave the status quo of the past and start looking ahead. And that's what I'm going to do. And as much as people want to talk about other opponents, there will be more. Many of them are my friends. My focus is on American families, how they're struggling, and what we're going to do to make sure that we get this country back.
Nikki Haley, there you go. She actually, one point, said that she doesn't put up with bullies. And I see Joyce Vance tweeting about that. She served in the Trump administration, so she definitely puts up with bullies. I think that's fair to say. And she didn't criticize him while, hardly at all. Certainly not while she was in office. She stood up for him, as a matter of fact, at the expense, I would argue, of those same American families that she wants to help. Does she really expect us to forget about that betrayal? And of course, most people are saying that she won't criticize Trump because she thinks if she inevitably loses the GOP primary, she could be vice president in a second Trump presidency. But of course, that will never happen because Donald Trump doesn't like her skin. I'm not making that up. He said something to that effect at one point. Oh, yes, here it is. The claim comes from the book The Divider by Peter Baker and Susan Glasser. The headline, Trump refused to appoint Nikki Haley Secretary of State over her skin. According to the book, former Ambassador Nikki Haley was rejected for the role of U.S. Secretary of State during the Trump administration because of a, quote, complexion problem. According to the book, then President Trump told then Chief of Staff John Kelly that the real reason she was not selected was the blotch marks on her cheeks. She's not good for me. She's got that, the complexion problem. It doesn't look good, okay? That's a quote, really. That's what he was alleged to have said. So he's going to eat her alive in a campaign he's already started. It's a real career suicide mission for her. All right, and here's just a quick news dump from the weekend. The story continues to unfold in Ohio, where residents are looking for answers about the toxic train derailment. 3 of the students in the Michigan shootings are recovering. 2 of them are still in critical condition. North Korea launched a couple missiles. That seems like it's a Monday. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken meeting with his Chinese counterparts, warning them about their balloons and more. Tons and tons of shootings over the weekend in Memphis and New Orleans and more, of course. The Secretary of State also went to Turkey and said the United States is here with aid. He's there touring the quake devastation, pledged $100 million and more in U.S. aid. Lots of stories coming out about 1 year of war since Russia invaded Ukraine. Super important anniversary there, and an important time to continue talking about that issue, which I have been here on the show throughout the year. And here's a good story. 12 cheetahs have arrived in India as part of efforts to revive the species after decades of extinction in the country. They were flown from South Africa, and the cheetahs will next be airlifted in helicopters and released to their final destination, the Kuno National Park, where they'll join 8 other cheetahs that were relocated from Namibia in September of last year. And looks like a great initiative. I've always been a fan of cheetahs, the coolest of the big cats. Well, I don't know if they're the coolest. Who am I to determine? All right, let's get to my first guest, shall we? Coming up, another great conversation with Maura Quint, who I talk to almost every Monday. She's one of my favorite, morally minded, thoughtful, extremely articulate, passionate, and hilarious people to talk to. So I made her a regular a long time ago, and you can listen to that at 42 minutes in the 42nd minute we start. If you're not interested in this really important conversation about economics and demographics, population, aging societies with my favorite economist, Dean Baker. Dean is the author of tons of books, several books. His blog, Beat the Press, provides commentary and criticism on economic reporting in places like the Washington Post, NPR, CNN, New York Times, and more. He's got a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Michigan. His analyses have appeared everywhere. He was formerly the senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute and assistant professor at Bucknell University. He's consulted all kinds of everywhere, from the World Bank to Congress to trade unions. In 1999, he co-founded the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and you can read his blog, Beat the Press, there, and you can support him on Patreon, as I do, with a subscription. Patreon.com/beatthepress. All right, I love this conversation. I love the piece that we're talking about, aging populations and great power politics. The problem is for the elites, not the masses, he writes. Let's do it with Dean Baker.
All right, my favorite economist joins us now, Dean Baker. My favorite because he's almost always right. He makes these predictions. He says, this will happen if you do this will happen if you do that, and then it happens, and then his credibility goes up with the public. At least, Dean, that's the way I think it should work in your profession, but who am I to decide?
Yeah, well, you know the saying in Washington, the only thing worse than being wrong is being right.
Why is that? Why is that?
You know, I mean, I don't want to be nitpicky or anything, but it's like if you point out, you know, I don't think someone should go into oblivion if they've been wrong, but it's reasonable to look at their track record. And people, when they're wrong, should, to my view, own up to it. Here's why I was wrong. I try to do that, and maybe I don't always succeed. But, you know, we all make mistakes, and you'd like to think you learn from your mistakes. And, you know, frankly, you should pay some price in the sense that someone who's always wrong, probably we don't want their advice next week. But that doesn't seem to be the way it works.
Well, we always want yours, which is why I read pretty much everything you write. Subscribe to your Patreon now, and everybody should be reading this article that I mentioned. But I do want to tell you, you know, I actually had an argument not an argument, but I was talking with my dad about the future of China. And as you write in this piece, we recently got new data showing that China's population shrunk last year. It's now projected to see its population continue to decline through the rest of the century. This is being portrayed as a disaster for China. That's how I portrayed it to my dad. That's exactly how I portrayed it to my dad. And he's like, why exactly? Can't they just produce more people? And I try to act like an economist. And I was like, listen, you gotta keep up with population growth. And if the older generation, and I had no idea what I was talking about, but I was trying to impress him. And then I read your piece and I'm like, oh, I was wrong. People I've been reading are wrong, because this is such a thorough. Take me through just the beginning part, and I've got a whole bunch of questions. Why does everybody get this demographic issue wrong?
Well, the basic story is that people act as though our well-being depends almost exclusively on the ratio of workers to retirees. I mean, that's the demographic horror story. And that's certainly part of it. I mean, if we have a higher ratio of retirees to workers, flipping that over, that's more of a burden on each worker. But that's really a very, very small part of the story. The much bigger part of the story is how productive we are. And even modest rates of productivity growth. I did an analysis here where I just said, let's assume productivity just grows 1% a year. And I was using
in China.
I'm starting with the U.S. It doesn't matter. I mean, 1%, I'll come to China in a second. My reason for saying 1% is that's an extremely low rate of productivity growth. So I just took data from the Social Security Trustees report and looked at the period of peak retirement of the baby boomers. So the 15-year period where we had the biggest stretch from retiring baby boomers, 2010 to 2025, straight from the Social Security Trustees report. And I said, okay, let's say that we have this big rise in the ratio of retirees to workers, all its baby boomers, I'm one of them, retiring in that period. And then let's say we have a 1% increase in annual productivity growth. Well, at the end of a 15-year period, after tax wages, we assume people are being taxed higher to pay for the retirees. They would still rise by 9% above what they were at the start of the period. So you go, okay, is that a horror story? Well, it'd be better if they rose more, maybe, but that's not exactly a horror story. And then I said, okay, well, 1% is actually, as I said, extremely low. Suppose it was 2%, roughly the post-war average. Then we're talking about a gain in after-tax wages of more than 20%. And mentioning China, China's been having productivity growth of well over 4% annually. Okay, now that may slow. I mean, much of that is that you have people coming from the countryside where they're very unproductive, working in agriculture, very unproductive. That's less true today. And going to factories, other jobs in cities where they're much more productive. They're largely at the end of that. Their urban population's around 63% of their total. Now, ours is around 80. There's still room they could go, and they will go. But it's not going to have as much impact going forward as it did in the past. In other words, the massive flows from the countryside to the city, those are largely over. But let's say they had 4%, 3%, even 2% productivity growth. They're still going to be much wealthier as a country 10, 15, 20 years out than they are today, even if their population's declining. Now, other parts of that story, as we get wealthier, as both our health improves in general, that's not everywhere and always, but in general, our health improves, people work later in life. Also, what's the case is that more often the jobs we have today, they're desk jobs. They're not physically demanding jobs. People aren't working in factories. They aren't working on farms. So it's reasonable to think a lot of people, I'm not going to make people work till 70. I expect to work till 70 and probably somewhat beyond. But, it's not going to be an arduous thing for a lot of people to work into their late 60s in the same way that would have been true, say, 50, 60, 70 years ago. When you're talking about people working in construction, manufacturing, those are now the exceptions. Going back several decades, that would have been the general story. The last point, when people are saying, oh, we need everyone to have more kids. Well, kids take resources too. And thankfully, for the most part, kids are not working anymore. So if we envision that, China's, they found the great path to get everyone to have, 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids. Well, then they're going to have to use up a lot of resources for the next 2 decades, feeding those kids, providing them health care, daycare. So the whole story is basically nonsense. It's an issue. Obviously, if you have a rising ratio of retirees to workers, as we do here, as they do in China, it's an issue. You have to deal with it. But the idea it's some crushing burden, it's just complete and total nonsense.
What about immigration? Where does that come into the factor?
Well, immigration is something that certainly can, and to my mind, should be used. Again, I'm not a fan in the sense I don't want to see the U.S. hugely more populated. I can't speak for China. Obviously that's a call they're going to have to make. But, we can and do have immigration, and we should. I mean, it's good for us. It's good for the immigrants. In many cases, it's even good for the countries that send them, because very often immigrants have repatriation. They send money back to friends, relatives in their home country, which in many cases, it's a very important part of their economy. Countries in Central America like El Salvador, where, their economy's pretty bad shape. The money that immigrants send to their family members is a really big deal for their economy. So I'd like to see us have more immigrants. I don't want to have us, someone wrote a book, Matt Iglesias, a few years ago, 1 billion Americans. Yeah. I'm not anxious for the country to have a huge population growth, but we certainly could do with more immigrants than we have. I should also add, I would love to see more high-end immigrants. I'd love to see our doctors face more competition, our dentists. So we've largely had a story where we like to make our manufacturing workers, people who are generally less educated, compete with low-paid workers from around the world, which pushes down their wages. But we protect our most highly educated, most highly paid workers. And that makes zero sense. Our doctors get paid twice as much as doctors in Germany and Canada. There's no justification for that. So I'd love to see some more immigration that way.
You also write in this piece, in fact, although declining populations may be a problem for political leaders who want to be more important in international politics, they're not bad news for the people of a country. I think that was probably one of the most important statements, sentences, or ideas in this piece. What's the difference between the interests of political leaders versus the public?
Yeah, well, most of us care about, our standard of living. Can we have, comfortable housing, the food we need, clothes, the staples of life? Can we live in a decent community? I mean, one of the points, again, the benefit of lower population is that we're less crowded. You want to go to the beach. Well, is it packed with people? Well, that makes it somewhat less pleasant, at least for me. I think most people go to parks. I mean, I like to do that, go to a museum. So you have less stress on these public goods. Also things like public transportation, traffic jams. Fewer people mean less congestion. So there's a lot of good things you could say about that. Now, from the standpoint of
none of that is picked up in GDP, you write, which is an important point just for anybody analyzing. It's not just data. There are other things, as you just mentioned, that aren't picked up in that data.
Exactly. So if, a lot of, congestion takes you an hour to work, whereas, hour to get to work, whereas with no traffic, you can get there in 20 minutes or something. That's a huge gain. I mean, I don't know anyone who likes to be stuck in traffic. So that's a huge gain, but that's something not picked up at all in GDP. So it's not picked up in our measures. So
you also mentioned all that traffic and the cost on infrastructure, which we only recently have done something about for the first time in a long time in this country. Other countries don't struggle as much with investing in their roads, bridges, et cetera.
That's right. So obviously, the more wear and tear on our infrastructure, the more money we will end up spending, but we don't pick up the loss. So there's no measure. I mean, people have constructed measures, but it doesn't appear in our GDP account. So if our infrastructure is wearing out in 10 or 15 years rather than 20 or 30, that's something that's not picked up in our GDP accounts. And obviously, with less stress, the infrastructure will last longer. So there's a lot of good reasons to think that most people would be happier with a declining population. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about massive annihilation. I'm just saying, if you had a gradual decline in population, like it's projected for China, Japan's been seeing it for, I forget when their population turned negative.
Did you see that professor, I think at American University, who was advocating for, and maybe I get this wrong and I'm cherry picking, but advocating for the elderly in Japan to commit suicide for the betterment of the country because of their demographic issue? Did you see that?
I saw that. I mean, it was nuts. I mean, I don't, I just read the New York Times piece on it. So he was saying he was being cryptic. I have no idea, so I don't
Where
really know.
Where are you on mass suicide to solve our demographic issues?
I'm not advocating that.
Just to be clear,
I'm not advocating.
Do you have any classified documents in your home also, I should ask?
I sure hope not. I'd be a little worried if there were,
Okay, so is too few workers even a problem? Another question you answer in this piece, and I learned so much from it. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the whole idea, too few workers, it is close to nuts. And again, you just have to be a good market economist. What happens when we don't have enough workers? Well, wages go up. And, I heard people go, oh, well, but some businesses can't afford to pay higher wages. That's the way a market economy works. So, you'll have some things, restaurants, a high-end restaurant might have a valet doing the parking. Well, if they had to pay that valet $20 an hour, maybe they wouldn't have the valet, so people will go to the restaurant. They'd either have to take a cab, Uber, whatever, or park their car themselves, or maybe walk, but so you have, and this isn't like a new phenomena. This is why we don't have half our population working in agriculture, because farms couldn't compete with factories. They couldn't pay the same wages that people get in factories. So people left the farm and they work in the factory. That's the way market economy works. So the idea we won't have enough workers. Now, people could point to sectors. You could say, well, childcare, they can't afford to pay higher wages. And that's exactly right. We have to subsidize childcare. So it's not a problem. We don't have enough workers. We have to place a priority. We have to make sure that parents have decent childcare. And that means that the government's going to have to subsidize it. It's kind of straightforward. So again, it doesn't boil down to not having enough workers. It really is just a, totally invented story. But I was getting to the other part of this from the standpoint of politicians who want power, and the people might want to advise them and they want to be important people. It does matter whether, what your population is. And I go on to, it's a little tongue in cheek, but not totally, not completely. Who's the prime minister of Denmark? I don't know, even though my wife's, I probably could guess it. My wife's Danish, so I probably should be able to tell you that, but I offhand I can't. Same thing, think of other countries in Europe, Netherlands. I mention these because these are very wealthy countries. So if you went there and looked how people were living, they have higher living standards in many ways than we do. They have longer life expectancies, lower infant mortality rate, longer vacations. I don't want to get a big argument who's got better living standards, but the point is no one could go to Netherlands and Denmark and think they're poor countries. But we don't know their prime ministers because they're small countries. Denmark has like 6 million people. I think Netherlands is about 18 million. So what does the prime minister of the Netherlands think about the war in Ukraine? Well, I have some vague idea, but if the prime minister changed their mind, it probably wouldn't matter. Same with Denmark. Obviously, the president of the United States does matter. Right. So it matters hugely from the standpoint of political power of a country, whether you're the United States with 330 million people or Denmark with 6 million. And then also going beyond just, say, the prime minister, president, and, their immediate circle, their cabinet, their foreign minister, their defense secretary, whatever. You also have, a whole class of pundits, political scientists who want to be important in the world. Here, I think I even mentioned him in the piece, Thomas Friedman.
Yes, well, I want to ask you, how dare you, first of all, let's see, the prime minister of Denmark is a woman named Mette Frederiksen. And how dare you not know that? And second of all, how dare you call out Thomas Friedman? Because I think this is one of the best things that you do is you're a critic of media, from the New York Times to Washington Post to everywhere else. So what is the issue with commentators and how they influence this conversation and debate over the demographic crisis, aging populations?
Well, they want to be important people in the world. And Thomas Friedman, if he didn't exist, we'd have to invent him because, he's incredibly pompous and, he'll do these things like, here's my advice for President Biden. Here's my advice. And he's been doing this for, 3 decades now, so here's my advice, well, it sounds really important when you're writing your advice for the most powerful leader in the world. It would sound much less important if he was writing his advice for the prime minister of Denmark. So their importance, their self-image depends that they're writing for a really big, powerful country, not they're in some much smaller country that doesn't have all that much influence on the world.
I got to ask you, this is such a really important piece and issue, but before I let you go, I think you're the only guy I know that's written books, at least one book about Social Security. And you've been one of the best people on that program and its existence, its creation, and the threat to, specifically privatize it. But what is happening right now is all too familiar with this debt ceiling fight. We got news yesterday that the country could run out of money, I guess, in July or August. I don't know what you think about that. But what do you say about this ongoing fight, specifically over Social Security, much less Medicare, and how they are being talked about in terms of cuts. We never talk about tax increases, of course. But anyway, what do you want to say about the current and seemingly all too familiar debate and dialogue around Social Security?
Well, the Republicans have wanted to cut and or privatize Social Security basically forever. I mean, they
didn't want to begin with, right?
That's right. That's right. And they've never really accepted it. I mean, maybe there was a brief period under Eisenhower, Nixon, where they sort of said, okay, it's here, nothing we can do about it. But they've really been going after it, certainly since Reagan was elected in 1980. And that was open. I mean, I'm not like, all this was public. He was saying it, so it's not like, I have some conspiracy theory, all totally above board. And they just take every opportunity, and they're looking to the debt ceiling as another opportunity to at least cut it. If they can get it on a path towards privatization, they would love that. And it's just exploiting an opportunity. Now, to be fair, we do need to do something over the longer term, and the longer term is not that long anymore about the finances of Social Security. It's an accounting issue. I mean, it's an accounting issue in the sense that we already have. I was talking about the baby boomers a moment ago. Most baby boomers are already eligible for Social Security, so it's not something future. We're already here. The issue is simply the trust fund, the way we've designed the payments for the program, that is projected to face a shortfall. I believe 234 is the date where we're first projected to see that. So we will have to do some shuffling around of funds, whether that means higher taxes, whether that means we run a larger deficit but commit general funds to Social Security. You can think of 1,000 different ways to cut this. I shouldn't use the word cut, to shape this, that don't involve cutting Social Security. But obviously the Republicans would like to take the opportunity to cut Social Security.
That's what they're trying to do. They won't get away with it. I mean, they have to do it covertly. They would have to, they can't.
Yeah, no, the only story they get away with is they get the Democrats on board. And they almost did. I mean, this is an ancient history. In 2011, there was talk, and the Obama administration was on board with this, a grand bargain that did involve cuts to Social Security. And that would go along with some tax increases, a lot of other things. But the point was that Obama was prepared to go along with that. That's the only story where the Republicans are prepared to cut Social Security, is that they have the Democrats sign on, because they know it's a deadly political issue. And if you watch the State of the Union, I mean, we all got a kick out of it. Biden made reference to them wanting to cut Social Security. You start yelling out, liar, liar,
yeah.
And Biden goes, okay, good. We're all in agreement. Social Security's off the table. So they want to do it either, they want to do it in conjunction with the Democrats. Otherwise it won't happen. And, I'm pretty confident Biden is, he's a good politician. He's just, no, we're not cutting Social Security. He's not going to give in on that.
Before I let you go, it'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the current state of the economy, Dean Baker. 500,000 jobs in January. The predictions just keep being, I think, way off. What is the state of our economy, sir?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm going to have to give you the worst possible answer and say I'm really confused. I don't want to get too nerdy on this, but that survey that told us 517,000. It's usually a very reliable survey, but it is a survey. All our surveys have error. As much as I'm generally inclined to go, oh, that's more or less the right number, which doesn't mean it couldn't be revised and show 30 or 40,000 more, 30 or 40,000 less. I think there's a serious issue with the numbers we're getting from that survey since kind of early 2022. I don't know why, but we have other data it doesn't seem to fit with. So I actually don't think that 517,000 job number was right. We will know more later this month when we get some other data. But I actually think that wasn't right. Now, what do I say about the economy? I think it is still healthy, going good. But let's say we created 250,000 jobs in January. That's still very good. But I think that might be more plausible than us creating 517,000, because there's just too many things that don't fit.
Any sector you're particularly paying attention to that you might just want to mention, something that's happening, occurring, trends?
Well, I'll mention two that have been surprisingly strong: construction and manufacturing. My reason for mentioning those is those are two that are generally hardest hit in a recession. So if you look back at the Great Recession, you look back at the 2001 recession after the market crashed, the early 90s, however far you want to go back, manufacturing and construction are hardest hit. both are still adding jobs. And I think that is reality. The reason for that is, in the case of construction, is we're kind of seeing a boom in construction related, coming first and foremost to manufacturing. And this is the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act that spurred all this investment in clean energy, electric cars. So we're seeing kind of a boom in construction, in manufacturing. Residential construction still strong in spite of high mortgage rates because we had all these unfinished homes. So you had all these homes that builders had started even back in 2021. They haven't been able to finish or hadn't been able to finish because of supply chain issues. They're still building them. So we have more homes under construction today than we did back in 2022 when the Fed started hiking rates. The other story, manufacturing, again, that's the clean energy story. So it's really striking that these two sectors where you expect to see big job loss in a recession, they're still adding jobs. And, that's great news in my book, but it does mean, from the standpoint of trying to slow the economy, I'm mixed stories. I don't want a recession. But from the standpoint of the Federal Reserve trying to slow the economy, at least in those sectors, it hasn't had the effect that we might have expected.
Can't thank you enough, Dean Baker. We love being in your classroom. I really appreciate your time today, and keep up the good work. And I hope everybody subscribes to everything that you're doing, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
All right, there he goes, Dean Baker, at DeanBaker13 on Twitter, at beat_the_press, CEPR.net, and patreon.com/beatthepress. All those links in the show notes for today's program and every day's. Check those out if you haven't, because I try to drop some fun nuggets in there as well. And if you're a paid subscriber, you'll get an email every day with all of that information and more, including a vitamin N picture. That's nature. N is for nature in vitamin N. Every day a picture from a listener, subscriber of their outdoor excursions. So get outside and bring your camera. I mean, it's in your pocket. Take a picture. No humans or human-made objects, except for a few exceptions, and send them over. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and you'll get to see a picture from someone to open your morning every day. That's how I like to see it. All right, now coming up, I've got the great Maura Quint. She is a writer, an activist, a mom of two boys, a hilarious human being, the founder of taxmarch.org. She's now with Americans for Tax Fairness. She's awesome still on Twitter and now on TikTok as well. She's really funny and thoughtful and awesome as always on TikTok. So go follow her over there if you do the TikTok. Ladies and gentlemen, Maura Quint.
And now we are on Maura Quint, who is just back from a little trip to the Florida coast and caught herself some kind of a cold. Listen to her. Hi, Maura.
Yeah, going to Florida just instantly makes everyone sick. It's just a terrible place. It's either physical or mental. And I was able to withstand the emotional sickness of being in Florida, but unfortunately, it got me right in the nose.
Yeah. So what brought you there? I mean, you do like the coast. You like the ocean, the waves, the beach. That's something where you find peace. So what brought you to Florida?
Well, I have those sort of boomer parents who have been able to go spend time in Florida every winter. And so they are the ones who compel me to go to that terrible, terrible state. There are a lot of wonderful people in Florida, of course. It's just, as a whole, not a big fan of the policies that are governing the place right now. But we went to visit my parents.
Any reactions? Every time I go to Florida, I gather a lot of material. It does seem like a different country. And did you have any experiences or reactions to any Florida culture or rules or anything else?
No, I mean, I think that the main thing is that because I actually traveled around Florida a little bit because I went to see different people and I took my kids some places, and it was just sort of a reminder that Florida is ridiculous. Like, it's just a strange, vast place with all of these very, often impoverished areas butting up against these like $1 million homes on the coast. And it's just a strange place. It does feel like you're in a foreign country. It does feel like, this doesn't seem like anything I know, even though, yes, poverty brushing up against wealth is something I know very well. Just the way it's laid out there, a little bit different.
Yeah, you can actually see the wealth gap in Florida in a way. I mean, you could see it.
Yeah, it's filled with alligators. It's like very clear, like you shall not pass. You cannot get over this. We are not allowing anyone from this side onto that side. We have made sure of it. We've kept the swamp in place.
Yeah, I can just think of one place. Florida listeners probably have lots of examples. Some people all over the country do and around the world about seeing the wealth gap. But I think like in Miami, when you drive across this one bridge and other places, you just drive from, $500,000 homes to multi-million-dollar homes, and they are divided by water for sure. And there is no affordable. I've
never been to Miami, and I never really want to go to Miami because I feel as though I don't own clothing small enough to ever exist in Miami. I think like they check your suitcase and they're like, oh my God, the sleeves, get out of here. No, you're not allowed. You have to turn right around. That's my impression, at least.
Anything else? Oh, I wanted to ask you about, you really do find the ocean. You sent me a video of the ocean, which is very nice. That's your nature spot. That's your happy place. It is. The water coming up on the beach. What is it about that? Or do you have a hard time finding that in Pennsylvania, that kind of connection to nature?
Yeah, no, I don't find it anywhere but the ocean. Like I've always been an ocean person. Like as a kid, I would just go into the ocean and stay in the ocean until I was forced to come out. But I had this absolute belief that if I just swam for long enough with my legs like pressed together, they would eventually fuse and then I'd be able to just swim away. Like that was it. That was the goal. I was just like eventually going to will myself into some sort of sea creature. Mermaid, fine, but it didn't need to be as like beautiful as that. I don't care if it was just a grouper. Like I just wanted to be gone into the waves.
You would rub your legs against each other so they would form a fishtail, like a mermaid or
I would just hold them tightly in place, like absolutely together, as though my legs were super glued together. Absolutely.
Why do you think maybe in a past life you were a sea creature, or why do you have that affinity towards the sea that way? That seems uncommon to some extent.
Well, I've often wanted to call myself a whale, so maybe we're moving on to something here.
Oh, come on.
No, I didn't mean it in a terrible way. I mean, like, truly,
you look like a baby seal.
Aw, yeah, I do feel like I should be clubbed. That seems fair.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't. What?
Mm-hmm,
you keep turning these. You do look like a sleek dolphin.
Do you know what dolphins do to each other? They are violent, terrible creatures. I mean, honestly, look into it. I don't want to go into it here, but they're
to each other.
Yeah.
Oh no! Wow.
No, I mean, there's some brutality in the dolphin kingdom.
Oh, I thought they were the perfect sea mammal.
They're wonderful too. They also have lots of like, they band together and they protect things from sharks, but they're like. They get a little like toxic masculinity out there in the dolphin world.
Their PR campaign would say otherwise. What do you have in common with a dolphin? And then we can move on.
What do I have in common with a dolphin?
Well, you keep comparing yourself negatively to these other sea creatures. So
I know. Do you understand how desperately I'm like, do I have a bottlenose? Like, what can I do here? What's the terrible thing?
I mean, I'm handing you blowhole jokes and you're just putting them on the shelf because they're probably beneath you, but
they are well beneath me unless I'm beneath them, and then there goes the blowhole. All right,
although you are blowing your nose a lot because you are congested.
Oh, look at that!
And I wonder, my wife and daughter have done the neti pot thing because when they got congested. I've not really heard of this. I want listeners to react. Have you ever tried that out? You pour a solution like saline through your nasal or something. I don't even know how to describe it.
That just always sounded both terrifying, disgusting, and like weird hippie shit that I didn't want to try.
Yeah. I don't think I would go for it. I feel
not that your family is any of those things, but that's what I see when I see that. There's there's like a world of products where I'm like, yeah, this probably would help me. This is probably a good thing I should try. But there's like some inner part of me that's like, get off my lawn, hippies. Like, I don't know. There's like a Richard Nixon in me that's just kind of like, that's bunk. Like, no.
Well, that's hilarious that you went with a Richard Nixon. But yeah, I did a quick search on it. It seems like there's some research on it, but I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm not going to get. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, because I based on very little research, but you yourself are a dog expert of sorts. And I took the dog for our weekly jaunt into the woods with my friend and his dog. He's a pediatrician and an all around smart guy. And he told me that the metal tag on collars can create hearing loss in dogs over periods of time. And I'm not sure if that's true, but I do know my dog's collar bangs on her bowl when she's drinking and it scares her. And I know another dog, same thing, and it barks. So I was like, forget it. I'm going to go do what he suggested, which is getting a dog collar with her embroidered, her name and my number embroidered into the collar so it doesn't have the metal tag. Have you ever heard this?
Never. No, I've never heard this, but I also don't care that much about animals and their well-being. So I wouldn't really pay them. I've just decided that this is the Maura is a terrible person episode of the show.
You do care about them, but more importantly, I got the new collar, and some people in my family, 2 of them, no names will be mentioned, have said they didn't like the color scheme I chose because it was too masculine for a female dog and she's going to be misgendered. I told them that was a ridiculous concern. Your thoughts? She froze. Are you back?
What colors are they? Yeah, what colors did you pick?
They're like a turquoise writing and a blue border. I thought it was going to be opposite, regardless.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Well, obviously, I do not believe there's any sort of like gender association with colors, but you could also, the blue, baby blue was originally used to signify girls, and red and pink were masculine colors. Like we flipped them in more recent years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's why you see when you look at, I don't know exactly the time period, but I want to say like late 1800s or whatnot, you see women wearing lots of like blue and baby blue. That was considered a very feminine sort of color. So you could actually just say that you are a traditionalist and you are reclaiming the original intention of the colors and just really hit them over the head with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And I think...
yes, winning arguments with your family through obscure facts.
Well, it's not a serious argument. They're not really upset, but it is kind of funny. I mean, I misgender dogs because I think they look and certainly my kind of dog, the little dog, I often think they look exclusively male. I think animals often look like more masculine or more feminine. And I think that's probably, I don't know. I don't know why it matters that much.
I don't think it does matter that much, but it is, of course, always a fun circumstance anytime we're getting involved in any sort of like gender ideology debate. Speaking of, there's a dog growling at me next to me right now.
Is it a boy or girl?
I don't know. I never asked it. I just ask it to go away while I'm recording, but it doesn't listen to that either.
A dog's owner being offended by someone misgendering their dog. I can't imagine. I don't think that really happens, but if it does, it'd be a very bizarre reaction.
Oh, it happens all the time. Like they always misgender a dog on purpose. Do it on purpose every single time. Maybe not every, but most of the time, you will get a little sharp tone of voice back there. She's a girl, like a very like a clipped, Ooh,
but
don't go jumping any.
I guess there's a reason to know if your dog and their dog are talking. There could be an issue with it, with gender. There is it a boy? Is it spayed, neuter, whatever? But like it's often
I think
also
that's just is it fixed no matter the.
Right.
Sex, right? Like,
well, I don't know. I don't know enough about dogs.
Unless you're like so into dogs, you're like, we want to breed dogs. In which case, like, I don't know. I'm sure it's a fine vocation, but it strikes me as a little creepy. So.
Yeah. And when it also says something about the owner, like I would never have that kind of dog. The dog says something about the owner often, I think.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's generally true.
When I first started walking, when we got this little dog and I started walking it, people would make fun of me and try to emasculate me.
Well, I have a dog that I've accidentally ended up with that is a pain in the ass, has anxious attachment, and like demands attention all the time. And I'm sure that says nothing about me.
All right, let's talk. Speaking of which, dating. You're going to be part of a really fun looking live show towards the end of March 23rd in New York City. And it is, the panel looks great. I know Jess McIntosh is going to be there, and it's hosted by someone named Lane Moore and Abby Crutchfield. Tell me about this event because it looks really fun. Tinder Live with
Well, first of all, that's fun that you know Jess because she is the one person on the bill that I do not know. Abby and Lane are the two I know, so you'll have to.
Yeah, she used to work with me at SiriusXM. We were always pretty cool. Yeah,
look at that. Yeah. Well, Lane Moore she's one of these people that you look at and you're like, I don't know how you do what you do. You're amazing and incredible, and like you just put out so many cool things all the time. You Don't Seem Possible. She has a band. She has written books, and she started this live show years ago. I mean, 7-8 years. It's been running for quite some time.
Oh.
Yeah, she's been doing it, and she tours around with it at various points. And I think she's had breaks and stuff probably while other different projects were picking up. But so she's done it at various points. And I did it with her once, like 6 years ago, probably it was. But it's just a really fun show. She's brilliant and hilarious. And she basically just goes on her Tinder live on stage and projects it on the screens. And we just talk through it. And so she always has 3 guests with her, kind of chatting and making jokes. And it's not, I mean, like, I say that out loud and it sounds almost cruel, I think, at first glance, because it's like, oh, these nice people who are, being made fun of. It's not that. It is not cruel. It's much more about sort of making fun of the whole process and, making fun of the ones that really demand it. Like, there are people who just post a picture of their crotch as their profile pic, things like that. That's fine. That's in bounds. And then sometimes she'll like strike up, she'll see what the audience says. The audience will be like, you should talk to that guy kind of thing. And like, she'll start a conversation live. And so it's very unpredictable. It's like a very weird mix of reality TV, improv, and comedy. And it is a lot of fun.
It looks legitimately super entertaining just on the idea alone. And not only, I mean, I think for anybody that has any experience dating and using the apps. But I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in committed relationships watched all of those game shows back in the day about, those dating game shows because they're super entertaining. Oh, yeah. And also it gives you the idea, if you've never used those apps, what that life is like to some extent or what it looks like. It sounds awesome. And with you on it, that'll be great.
Yeah, it should be fun. At the very least, like, I mean, for me, I'm just happy I get to be there because it'll be fun to watch, even if I have, a seat on the stage. I'm totally entertained by it.
Well, maybe we'll get
a
crew of listeners to come. I'm sorry to step on you right there.
You bastard. How dare you?
I'm so sorry. I thought you were done talking, but this damn...
I'm never done talking, Pete. What are you...
This damn app.
You've known me for a while. It just keeps going and going and going.
So, speaking of which, let's talk about, I mean, you've been tweeting about, I'm not sure how much you're thinking about, but the train derailment in Ohio, you think, of course, a lot about government and your work and policy. And it would seem that at this point, what we're talking about are regulations and profit seeking. And, I like to think that we do a lot better than a lot of other countries in many ways in terms of things like aviation and other things, but certainly not nearly as well as other countries in many ways as well, too. So there's a lot to talk about. And I really don't understand this yet. I'm trying to figure it out and have some people on. But what are your thoughts on what's going on in Ohio and other places?
I think it's incredibly disturbing and distressing. It's really weighed heavy on my mind following all of this. I think it's really... It's scary. I mean, like, I don't know how else to sort of preface it other than it is intensely scary. I mean, right now it's like, we hope it's not as bad as it could be, but it is certainly the sort of circumstance that says if it's not as bad as it could be, the next one will be worse than it could be. I mean, we are not in any place where we can sit here and go, what a weird one-off that was. That'll never happen again. I mean, we had the same thing happen instantly, I think it was a truck in Texas and then another train derailment in Michigan this past week. It's happening at a ridiculous rate. And we are clearly not set up or designed to deal with this or handle it because we look to the corporation to sort of like, it's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry. It's totally fine. And I think we're at a place in human history where we can very, very vocally say, hey, yeah, that's what they said about Flint, Michigan and still say for, decades and decades. We don't have any
Jackson, Mississippi water too.
Absolutely. I mean, I use Flint not because it's the only one, but because it is just such a clear name to draw to. But it is merely an example of something that is happening consistently, and we allow it to happen consistently without tremendous blowback, especially because it's happening in places that are, I don't even want to say economically depressed, but they are not economically they're not incredibly wealthy neighborhoods, right? We won't stand for it there. But as long as we're poisoning places where people don't seem to have as much money, we kind of go, it's all right. It's fine.
Always a conversation about government regulations, local, state, federal government regulations versus, in my mind, the greed of human beings. So we have regulation, whether it be gun violence or automobiles or drugs or trains or energy, school, it's this conversation. And a lot of people say we're over-regulated. There's too many regulations and there needs to be a better balance. I always come down on the side of, I'm pro-regulation. I'm pro-guardrails. I think the pharmaceutical industry and the financial industry should be heavily regulated. The agriculture industry should be heavily regulated. Guns and ammo, all of that. I don't see it as that controversial, and I can't think of too many regulations, certainly, that have made my life more, difficult, harder. I can only think of a lack of them that have made it more dangerous and less secure.
Well, I think one of the reasons that we hear that a lot, and, this is a little bit of speculation, a little bit of experience, but, we have such a impossible government where it is so hard to push things through. So these regulations come up. First of all, very few come up that are truly addressing the problem, that are pure of motive and noble. I mean, so often they are already sort of corrupted by the time they are even brought up to a committee. But then beyond that, we have such intense lobbying, the way that the money flows into our political system and the way that candidates are being funded means that corporations too often already have a say. They already have a massive seat at the table intellectually before they even need to send a lobbyist into the room, because people know who's going to be writing their checks for re-election. Yeah. So there's already these interests being held high, which means the regulations are coming through and they are being corrupted. They're not going through in ways that are necessarily the most helpful. And you end up in the end with these bureaucratic mess. Not always, but often. And so you end up with a lot of weird paperwork that isn't really very helpful without actually addressing the problem. It's kind of like you're bleeding out and someone says, let's just put Band-Aids all over you. Well, now you're just covered in Band-Aids, but you're still bleeding out. It started to get near it, but mostly it just created a lot of problem. And while we're putting on the Band-Aid, each Band-Aid has to be filled out in triplicate. It's all kind of focused on the wrong place, right? We need to apply pressure directly to the wound. It can't just be these little patches here and there that aren't actually going to solve the problem.
That's a great analogy.
And I think that's where you end up with a lot of people who run into all those sort of regulations and the bureaucracy. And they're like, why do I have to do this? This is nonsense. I have to jump through all of these hoops just to do something. And I think a lot of times they're right. They did have to jump through a lot of hoops that didn't really help anything. But that is because fundamentally, our laws are not necessarily being made in the ways that are most beneficial and that are actually addressing the real problems at hand. And I mean, when we look at this corporation, the railroad company there are so many different examples that we can point to. We look at the railroad workers who went on strike, right? Specifically calling out these types of things. And we saw the backlash to that. We saw so many people, and it wasn't just people on the right. We saw so many people saying, oh, suck it up. What's wrong with, what's wrong with you striking? You just want more money, you greedy assholes. That's what people say to the striking workers who are saying, hey, we need a day off now. We're not even asking for more money. We're asking for regulations. We're asking for sick time and things like that can allow for safer travel for these industries to be generally safer. And they still get shut down and they still get called these sort of whiny, greedy jerks. That's thing one. Thing two, we have corporations that we're empowering and we're saying, oh, you take care of it. We trust you. You're fine. We're going to regulate you in some way, while fully allowing them to be just motivated by this unbridled capitalist greed. And you look at the amount of stock buybacks. I mean, this is off to the side. I know.
No, I want to hear go ahead.
But you look at the stock buybacks that these companies invest in, they are doing so much again.
I'm sorry. Are you still talking about the railroad industry or just in general?
Yes, railroad, railroad in particular. This particular railroad engaged in a tremendous amount of stock buybacks because they were looking for bottom line profits for the higher ups and the CEOs, which that's been their focus. It has been motivated entirely by profits. And when we allow that to continue at this unbridled pace, and then we additionally say, hey, you're also responsible for the cleanup and the well-being, and we somehow think that's not also going to be entirely motivated by profits and nothing else, not by any sort of humanity or care about the communities that they are entering into, it's a fool's errand. It's ridiculous. We have to recognize that when we allow them to continue solely to operate for their own corporate well-being and nothing else at the very top, that's what they're going to use to drive everything. And we are going to end up with disaster after disaster after disaster and nothing in place to deal with it in a really effective way. Sorry, I ranted. I could keep ranting. I'm very mad about this one, actually.
I just got something to back up what you're saying here about the stock buybacks. The Groundwork Collaborative took a look at corporate earnings from railroad companies. And this is from back in September. This is an article written as a result of the strike that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And based on recent corporate earning calls from Union Pacific, CSX, Canadian National Railway, Norfolk Southern, shed new light on the dynamics underlying rail workers' ongoing fight for more safety and dignity in the workplace. When it comes to shoveling more money to investors, Groundwork Collaborative found that Union Pacific, leading the pack in 2022, rather than using billions of dollars in revenue to improve pay and job conditions, Union Pacific gave $5 billion to shareholders through buybacks and dividends in the first 6 months of this alone. And that's just the first one. The article goes on, and the study goes on to look at the other companies, CSX, Norfolk, Southern, and the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. And
surprising.
We're seeing this. I mean, when you saw what Norfolk Southern offered then the town as well, it was, I think, $5 per citizen for this. I think we also
the railroad line that was the result that is
following
responsible.
The disaster. This is what they offered the town. Oh, so sorry about that. What they offered the town in terms of a sort of cash settlement was the equivalent of $5 per person. And
Come on.
No, it's sickening. It's sickening what they are allowed to do because they think they can just kind of keep going on and it won't hurt their CEO bottom line.
Norfolk Southern gave $5 to the Ohio East Palestinian residents affected by toxic train.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we have this like sort of disaster movie mentality because you see something happen, like a terrible disaster in a movie. And I feel like one of the sort of cliched lines that you hear next is you hear someone in charge saying, we got to get these people out of here. Like, right. Like we got to, this is going to harm. Like they're instantly thinking about the people. And we have this thought. I think it seeps in that we think that that's what's happening, right? Like, oh, well, if it was really bad, they would have gotten us out of there. Like somebody would have said, we have to get these people out of there. And they would have bussed us all out to the next town and they would have put us up in hotels an hour away until they had, like whatever. There's this belief that that someone is looking out for them. But again, when we let corporations do it, which is what we have done, we see time and time again, we just end up with these triangle shirtwaist factory fires in various forms everywhere, except that there was outrage over that. And we don't have the same condensed outrage because they have conditioned us to get used to it. We just allow it to happen.
Yeah, very well said.
They're locking the towns of these cities that they are destroying and letting everyone burn because it's much slower. You don't see people jump from the windows.
By the way, in case anybody wants to criticize me for hosting someone with a nasally voice, I give you the content, the arguments, and the points that you just made because you've been thinking about, writing about, talking about, and advocating for these things for such a long time. I love what you just said. It's so important. Let me move on to one more important issue. I saw that you tweeted this, and I've been thinking a lot about this and getting just outraged by it. But Judd Legum of Popular Info tweets, somehow this has become a point of controversy, but it's an unassailable fact that the majority of Republicans in Congress right now support cuts to Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
And then he tweeted a whole thread about it. He's been covering this. You also have been talking, writing, and covering this for years. Give me any points or any history, because it's just crazy that people don't know that Republicans were against these programs when they were being thought about, when they were created. and including, we could throw in Obamacare, because it's happened during our lifetime and we watched it. And then they become extremely popular because they work pretty well and people like them. And yet they still want to cut them, and somehow they're not getting that reputation. What do you say?
Well, I think Republicans have done a fantastic job of both, speaking out of both sides of their mouths. And they've been doing it for so long that it's second nature, in terms of they say one thing to a particular type of base, and then they say another thing to their actual donor class, the people that they are actually working for. And they do this consistently. And they do it by invoking sort of either religious or emotional kind of values, and then legislating completely opposite to that. But they can stump speech all they want about how much they care about families and traditional values of taking care. While, on the other hand, in reality, what they're pushing for are things that are inevitably going to hurt people. And I mean, like, you'd say, you can just call them liars, right? But at this point, we've been calling them liars for so long, it doesn't even seem to matter. It doesn't really seem to stick. They have trained their base through so many different levels of communication to only believe what they're being told through very specific venues. And then we see things like when we saw the lawsuit that brought up all of the Fox transcripts, the Dominion.
Oh God, yes.
Lawsuit.
I can't stop reading and thinking about it. It's really wild to see what they were saying, Fox anchors off air to each other, and what they were saying on air. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we saw all of these texts pulled from immediately following the 2020 election between Fox anchors and talking about like how they were going to cover this, and being just very straightforward about the lies that they were going to tell, being very like, hey, we're not going to, we know that nothing is wrong. We know that this election is valid. Our
viewers don't want to hear the truth, basically.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so they have absolutely no problem. And they've set up these huge empires. And now we're in a place where Fox News is it's not moderate, but it is moderate for right media. It is not as far right as other media empires are now. They keep pushing their viewers further and further right, further and further away from anything that is true. And they condition them that they're the only ones. I mean, they're the only ones telling them the truth. It is very much the same sort of ways that cults work, right? Like, no, you can't trust anyone but me. I'm the only one telling you the truth. Yeah. I have the word of God or Trump or whomever, and I'm the only one who can deliver it to you. And everyone else is a false prophet who's trying to lure you away from the right path. And that is what they have continued to do. And then it gets more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. It lures you in and then keeps pushing you over. And so it's very understandable that a majority of these viewers and these individuals, these voting blocs on the right, are just completely unaware of what the actual intention of Republicans have been. And the other frustrating part is that when you do have sort of like centrist, I don't want to call it left media, but like centrist media, like, maybe I'd put CNN there or whatever, they have this need to consistently be trying to pull up arguments on both sides. But as the arguments on the right get more and more extreme, and what they're saying get more and more extreme, the center keeps moving to the right because it keeps trying to triangulate. And so it also moves to the right. And then you also then end up with like people who, maybe they have they're trying to keep an open mind. They're trying to understand, but they're still hearing, well, Republicans are saying that they don't want to do this. Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't really like Republicans, but what am I going to say? I'm just going to say they're all liars. That's crazy.
Right.
Because they still want to believe in some sort of truth and humanity. And they're still seeing these people elevated on, centrist news outlets. So I guess they must have some authority. They must know what they're talking about. And so you see even like people who are not fully within the cult going, well, I mean, that can't really be true. This is why would CNN have him on if he was just an outright liar?
Right. By the way, CNN, I don't know where you would put them these days, but I think they're moving closer to the Don Lemon.
Yeah, to the right.
Do you feel like you're past your prime? Did you see that whole thing?
Oh,
he said Nikki Haley was past her prime. And
the problem that I have with that is that I was supposed to have a Prime. Nobody told me that. Like, I didn't have a Prime. When was that supposed to happen? I've just been on the other side of it the whole time.
You drove right past your Prime and didn't even see it.
And then they were like, no U-turns. I was like, this is bullshit.
There are always U-turns. There are infinite possibilities every day. And you provide them for me. So let me ask you this. Finally, happy note. What you watching? What you reading? What you listening to? Give us one of any of those, Maura. A suggestion for a TV or show or movie, a song, a book, an article. One suggestion, please. Putting you on the spot.
One suggestion is impossible. All right. I was just away from my house at a place that had like TV, which I hadn't seen, like the regular,
like you turn it on in a remote and you click through the channels.
You flip the channels and you find a channel changer. So I'm going to give you two things because I hadn't seen TV like that in forever. And I was like, oh my goodness, here are two things that are wonderful. One I forgot about, one I didn't know before. The one I forgot about was I love Jeopardy so much, and Ken Jennings is incredible. He's such a great host. I love him.
Oh,
He's fantastic. And Jeopardy is so much fun. I missed Jeopardy. And the other is one I had heard about. A friend of mine had suggested it, and he's a TV reviewer. And it's this kids show, Bluey, and I had suggested it to my kids, and they were like, that's a baby show. We don't want to watch that. And then we were in a hotel room, and it was on, and the three of us just like watched it for hours and hours. It is so, I actually think, Pete, you would love it. I mean, it's a little kids show. You would love it. It is perfect for you. It is so like, I don't know. I'll send you his review. I don't want to pretend that I can sum it up, but
yeah. Am I going to be watching
show? Am I going
to be watching Bluey alone?
You're going to be watching Bluey alone. I mean, don't tell people that. They're going to think you're doing a whole different thing.
I might. You don't know me. You don't know me. What I like. Maybe it's. I'm not. All right. Let's not go there.
Yeah, animated Australian dogs. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. It's Aussie. Got it. It's starting. I have heard of this, but okay. Those are great suggestions. Both of them. Jeopardy. You can always come home. Mm-hmm. You can always come back to Jeopardy. And Bluey.
You always can. I hope. I hope.
And you can always, hopefully, hear Maura with me on Mondays, generally speaking. Thank you so much for joining me, even though you're feeling under the weather. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Bye, Pete.
All right, there she goes, everybody. Maura Quint. Go follow her on TikTok, on Twitter. Let her know that you heard her here, and thank her for joining us, as well as Dean Baker. Dean Baker13 on Twitter, and everything else in today's show notes. Well, that is it for you. That's all I've got. I hope you appreciated today's program. Thank you to my bumblebees who are still listening. That's what I call you. It's a long story. A couple weeks ago, I said that's the key word if you're still listening, and a whole bunch of people emailed me. I think I got back to about 3/4 of you. Sorry if I didn't yet, but remind me if I didn't. Love you guys. You're the best. Thank you for your support. If you haven't already signed up for a paid subscription, I got to tell you to please do that. I got to ask you. Please go on over patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now. All right. Tomorrow, who will I have? I've reached out to Jeff Jarvis and James Fallows. I've got a great conversation with Maddie Carlson, which I need to just lightly edit and get up for you. Love doing the listener spotlight. I've got a UCLA legal professor who's got a new book out coming on, and so much more exciting things this week that Odessa and I are cooking up for you. Let me know who you want to hear. Let me know who you want to see on Thursday night at the Hangouts. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Going to invite some special guests to surprise us and just pop in and say hello this week. But that's all I've got for now. I hope that you are doing all right in the moment, meditating, reading, writing, exercising. And if you're not, here's a great Pema Chodron quote to end the show. Start now. Start where you are. Start with fear. Start with pain. Start with doubt. Start with hands shaking. Start with voice trembling. But start and don't stop. Start where you are with what you have. Just start. Have a good day, folks. John Carroll, take us out.
Stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand